Hello, I'm Derek Wayroche, President and CEO of Palladium One Mining. Palladium One is an exploration stage company focused on nickel, copper, and platinum group elements in both Finland and in Canada.
Derek, good to see you. Armstrong, thanks for making time for us. Look, two bits of big news, okay? One, Glencore has just invested in you, which is obviously a big deal, but they've done that in the backdrop of the second bit of big news which we see coming out of the US, which was around the US government basically, I guess, mandating, I'm not quite sure, 2/3 of electric vehicles by 2032. 2/3 of vehicles should be electric by 2030. That's a big deal. So what I want to kind of kick off with that, Glencore, I guess. How'd you get them on? What are they looking for? What do they want?
I think both of these bits of news are really fantastic and speak to the macro environment that we're in. You know, the governments on the one hand are giving mandates and targets with regards to tailpipe emission standards, basically forcing industry and investment into the EV space. And the likes of majors like Glencore coming and looking at an exploration stage company with nickel copper assets and doing an equity investment is a testament, I think, to what's happening in the space and the need for metal to supply the entire value chain going forward for the ability to deliver into these requirements.
I mean, we're starting to see a lot of, we're certainly in the battery thematic, right? We've been going to conferences, you know, the precious metal stuff is, you know, I think it's starting, green shoot, shall we say. But in terms of investors rocking up for that. There is no doubt, however, at any of the battery metal focused conferences that we've been to, that the interest is not there. It is ram-packed full of investors and companies, obviously. So that kind of the mood of the nation should tell us something, and that's fairly anecdotal. But what does it mean when you start seeing people like Glencore, like car manufacturers, like battery manufacturers moving upstream? I mean, that's a space they've typically avoided before.
Oh, absolutely. And I just think it speaks to the fundamental demand that's coming down the pipe here. And there obviously is, if you look at any of the research, a lack of metal and progress with regards to permitting projects. So the major companies, whether it be an OEM or trading houses such as Glencore, are looking for sources of supply to meet the demand expectations on the full battery suite of metals. And you touch on precious metals there a little bit. Copper goes into everything, right? You just basically need it for civilization. So I would think there's going to be more action in terms of major companies looking for large copper gold porphyries. So with a focus on the copper side of things, and they'll have their precious metal byproduct being the gold. But again, that's still very much thematically down the base metal, battery metal theme that just happens to have a sweetener attached to it. So I think that's why part of the reason some of the interest is changing, because there will be ample supply of the precious metals.
Okay, and talk to me about this, because if it's a group like that to come on board, they'll have done some diligence. Clearly, it's not just a case of you've got nickel. Gives a shout when you're ready, because we'll do an offtake, or we'll pick it up off of you, because and Glencore are quite busy. Obviously, the tech deal as well. So out there in terms of headlines at the moment, and they are very, very keen to kind of move upstream in a big and meaningful way. The jurisdictional risk to them, they're more than aware of. They've been caught out a few times. How big a part did that have to play in terms of them coming on board with your project?
I think their exposure globally is in all sorts of different jurisdictions and risk profiles. So I think they're quite comfortable dealing with jurisdictional risk. Obviously, a preference to North America is always there because it just ticks one of the de-risking boxes. So that is definitely important. But I think, the driver for them was twofold. One, we have assembled a portfolio of large-scale projects, and we've been talking about it for quite some time, that we think are going to attract the attention of a major player or participant into our story, and that's now taken place. But, Tyco in particular, we've got a 30,000 hectare property package there. It's completely greenfield. There's really no historic work on it, not even by the Ontario Geological Society or Survey. And as a result of that, the discovery success we've had, and, I'll point out we've had our third discovery announced recently on that project. They're basically 20 kilometers apart. It's a huge opportunity for something brand new, and I think that is very intriguing. It's not a rehash of a historical project that's been overly worked. It's really a new camp in an area where there is a history of mining.
Okay, and tell us about the deal, and more importantly, where that leads me is to what's their expectation of you? What's their involvement with you in terms of contributing more than just capital? Because this needs to go somewhere for them.
Oh, absolutely. So we are formalizing a technical committee just of management. It's going to have a minimum of 3 people on it, and one of which will be a representative from Glencore. And the people still need to get appointed to it, but most likely it'll be Peter Lightfoot, who's on our board, Neil Pettigrew and a Glencore rep, and possibly we'll add another individual as well. And really, it's us having the ability to tap into their infrastructure and their teams, whether or not we need a geophysicist. There's something we want to look at. We need some additional assistance. They're going to provide that service to us, and that's going to be very helpful. And we'll have a collective think about how best to approach the projects. But the investment they did is quite straightforward. It was a 15-cent financing, giving them about 9.99% equity interest in the company. So we raised about $4.2 million. The transaction has very conventional terms with regards to anti-dilution. They don't want us to go out and raise money without giving them the opportunity to maintain their ownership interest. So that is sitting there. And as I said, the technical committee that's been formed, and that's about it. And provided they maintain a 7% interest in the company, they will maintain their 2 rights.
The technical committee is the bit that interests me most, because if you're talking about how to move things forward, junior companies need to put out some nice headlines to kind of get people excited about what's going on. Hopefully, as we've described at the beginning of this conversation, there's a kind of very positive trend, a very positive narrative and backdrop with government involvement and government incentives and tax credits and so forth. Canadian government playing their part. Glencore, big company, need bigger signals. So there's going to be some quite interesting conversations we've had about how you spend that $4.25 million in the ground and what it is that you need to see from that spend.
Well, I think that's right. And this is where we're going to have to focus on how we best thread the needle, because as a junior explorer to drive your equity price, the market likes to see drilling. That's basically it, right? But there's a bunch of work you have to do before that drilling with regards to de-risking, especially if you're getting a little bit deeper, because it just costs so much money for each hole. And if you have misses, that's not necessarily a good thing. So the plan initially is to continue on the geophysics area and focus that we have. We're very much believers in geophysics. It's proven extremely effective for each of the discoveries we've had over the last 3 years. And we will be starting up a small program using a couple different techniques as soon as the snow permits, really. So hopefully it's in May timeframe. To de-risk, and then we'll follow that up with a ground-based work with regards to soil sampling and whatnot in advance of drilling. But it's going to be a mixed bag in terms of what we're doing. We also have a number of different targets on the property. So first and foremost, what we need to do is really try and refine where we're going to be looking on the property. And that means boots on the ground, lots of soil sampling. And, we're buying in, for example, an XRF machine to be able to very quickly in the field identify and understand what those soil samples are representing. And we have tens and tens of kilometers worth of these interpreted conoliths that we've been speaking about over the last few months. And, it's going to take some time to get through that and figure out exactly where it is we're going to drill. So first and foremost, I think we got to focus on zeroing into areas where we want to continue to spend money in advance and balance that out with some drilling to expand the existing areas that we have the discoveries in.
Right. Okay. And so you're talking. I think you were talking about Tycho specifically. There,
Yes.
Canalask as well. Obviously, copper nickel project too. Is any of this new capital being allocated there?
Yeah, the new capital can be allocated anywhere where we have nickel. So in Finland as well. We don't really have a constraint with regards to that. It's for nickel exploration. But with nickel, as you know, you get copper. You quite often get the PGs. So we're hitting the full suite, and that's one of the reasons we have a little bit less constraint on us than others might have, where you've got transactions at a project level only.
No, I was about to say. So okay, getting this money in, especially in this market, which has been tight. Like I say, people are still a bit nervous broadly in the investor market. Obviously, I've indicated certainly what we are hearing and seeing is that EV type commodities, the nickels, the coppers, the lithiums, graphite, cobalt, stuff this, are getting a little bit more attention than others. But where does this money take you through to? It buys you a bit of time. So one, great that you've got it in, and certainly who you've got it in from. That's pretty interesting. But how much time does this buy you? Because you've also got to think about, well, what is the market doing at the moment? When will the positive sentiment really start motoring? I've seen green shoots, but you've got to time this as well, haven't you?
Oh, absolutely. And so let me just put it in a little bit of context as well. We raised $5 million in December for exploration in Ontario, largely, but 4.2 is dedicated for Ontario or Tycho, and about 750 we can push up to Canalask. And, that gave us a $11.4 million cash balance at the beginning of the year. So with this Glencore investment, it's going to add about 4.2 on a pro forma basis. But not only that, we several weeks ago also announced the acquisition of a company called Metalcorp, which is going to provide us with a couple more critical mineral projects in proximity to Tycho. Well, that transaction, it's only $3.3 million acquisition, but $1.8 million of that is additional cash coming to us. So on a pro forma basis, had all this been done on January 1, we'd have about $17.5 million of cash. So very well positioned. It's going to give us a long runway. We're not of the type to just spend for the sake of spending. So we like de-risking things first. First and foremost, we're going to invest the flow-through money, that $5 million, and before we start tapping into the money we received from Glencore. So results will define the pace at which we can advance the projects, and ideally, we'd like to get some sort of hit on something and say, hey, let's go add 2 or 3 drill rigs to it and have the problem of finding more cash. But the progress is going to define exactly the rate of spending.
Okay. I guess you partially answered the next question. My final question really was, obviously, with that amount of cash on the balance sheet, in the bank, you've got optionality about the speed and the direction of that capital allocation. What else do you have in the bank in terms of future maybe non-dilutionary cash raising? Because obviously with Metalcorp came some like a royalty portfolio. Obviously you've kind of got the Finland asset, and obviously depending on what you're starting to see with Canalask, etc., you may be able to do things with those. And I just wondered, maybe with cash in the bank, it's a less pressured decision-making environment than, say, if you were down to, your last $1 million. But are those options that you're talking about now, or will you leave those for another day?
Yeah, those are definitely options we're thinking about, but we're not actively working on. We first have to close the Metalcorp transaction. One of the beauties of that particular transaction is we don't need to spend any money on those projects for at least 10 years. There's enough banked up assessment credit, so we're in good shape and have the option to vend those projects or otherwise to monetize when appropriate. But we have not focused on that. First part is let's get the transaction closed. Let's continue to focus in on Tycho and Canalask.
I mean, okay, and this, I said it would be the last question, but one more. Okay, we talked about the macro, and we talked about governments and battery manufacturers and car manufacturers, and yet coming upstream to trying to get a hold of these metals to secure supply chains for the future, to incentivize companies. But and you've just explained you've got the money to kind of navigate your way through that market. But how are you viewing the market at the moment? And because if I look at the equities just aren't there yet. I mean, are you surprised by that?
Well, I think there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. Globally, the macro environment is quite concerning. So yeah, the equity capital perhaps is sitting a little bit on the sidelines. But quite frankly, I'm a bit of a contrarian investor. I think this is the time of the cycle where one actually makes money by getting in at these types of valuations. We can see all the signals with regards to the government mandates. You look at, again, I refer back to the investment that Glencore did with us. We're exploration stage, nickel, copper. They're coming in and taking a look at us. Now is the time, I believe, to get positioned, because the demand is going to be there when that turn happens and the equities start re-rating along the price of the metal. I think the metal prices are going to go quite dramatically as well. It's going to rip your arm off in terms of what's going to happen with the dynamics here. But exactly when that happens, I don't know. Is that 6 months from now? Is that 18, 24 months? I don't know. But positioning yourself now is what I think is important. And that's part and parcel of why we did the Metal Corp transaction. We're picking up a couple critical mineral projects and a very interesting little copper project in Ontario as well. And now I think is the time to be a buyer, an investor. And, from an investor perspective, I think you want to look at teams that can advance projects and have a proven ability to advance projects, because I think those are the ones that are going to stand out in the long term.
Thank you for making time for us today. I know it was a kind of quickie, and thanks for fitting us in from a sunny day here in England and a sunny battery metals market. We'll see you soon.
See you soon. Thank you very much once again.